Welcome back, Jayhawks fans. The Kansas Jayhawks will head to face the St. John's Red Storm tomorrow at 7 p.m. on FS1. The Jayhawks have now dropped from 4th in the rankings to 8th, and the team that beat them was the Dayton Flyers, who still remain unranked. So that doesn't say a whole lot for Kansas's loss, which is probably why they dropped 4 spots. They're now ranked below the likes of Villanova, Texas, Baylor, UCLA, Duke, Purdue, and I forget the other team that is ranked above them. But this game appears to be kind of a relatively closely predicted game, or closely matched game, I should say. Most predictions I've seen have, Kansas winning anywhere between 55 to 57%. So that's a lot closer than what I've seen for any of their games so far this year. Bill Self, his press conference prior to the game, they asked him what he thought about the team's defense, and he said that the Jayhawks typically always start out near the bottom of the conference in defensive stats or defensive efficiency, and then they usually rise to the top half of that, or the top, 1 or 2 teams by the end of the season. You can't really judge any of that until the teams start playing each other, and that makes sense. I mean, if you judge Kansas's defense against a team, I remember Baylor used to play some really easy opponents in the beginning of the year, and so you'd have Kansas playing in these tournaments like the ESPN Events Invitational, playing more of a difficult roster, more of a difficult schedule than what some of these other teams are playing to start out their season. I mean, if your season's catered by Dolly Madison, well, then you should have better defensive efficiency. So I kind of agree with him on that. He said this year's team cannot cover for mistakes like last year's team could. He said Marcus Garrett made up for a lot of errors that some of his teammates would make. Marcus Garrett would be able to compensate for, players that might, get the ball. It's like he could do a better job of, defending players that his teammates might not have defensed well in the first place, if that kind of makes any sense. That's the way I took it. He says the team hasn't changed since Orlando. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. He says he feels like they played well. Before I go on with that, if you're new here, please hit the subscribe button. Subscriptions would really help. Hit the like button. If you have any comments or questions, put them down below. I'm still trying to get some high school stats on some of the new players that KU has recruited for the 2022 season. So that's why I haven't come out with that video yet. So I'd like to try to find some of those stats for you, so I can present that to you when I present whether or not, I think these guys, how I think they're going to fit in. So that's why I haven't brought you that video yet. If you would, share this video out there with your friends, and I'll go ahead and continue. Jalen Wilson is still kind of getting up to speed. He was obviously suspended for the first 3 games of the season and the exhibition game against Emporia State. But Bill Self doesn't feel like it's going to take him too long to get up to speed. He's not really concerned with who starts, which I thought this was kind of interesting. He's not concerned with who starts. He doesn't really pay attention to that. But yet, when they tipped off against Iona, David McCormack didn't jump at the beginning of the game. It was Ochai. That suggests to me that Self was sending, and I had said this in a previous message, is he going to maybe lose his starting spot? That was probably a little more emotional, or, kind of frustration with how he's been playing. But I do think Self sent him a message. And I think he said, hey, look, the game's you're not going to start the game off for us until you start playing better. And I think that was maybe just a way of maybe Self trying to motivate him. Self mentioned that they asked him about how practices went, and he said that they basically conducted practices. They didn't score. They didn't count scores. If one team scored on the defense, and then they go down to the other end and the other team scores, they didn't keep track of all that. But that the players that allowed the fewest scores, or the fewest balls to go through the hoop, had less activities to do at the end of practice, such as running. They didn't have to run as hard or run as much. I don't know why that was an important question, but it was one of the ones that was asked. He went ahead and said he wants to see McCormack play well, and that they need him to play well. Again, I think Ochai doing the tip, at the beginning of the game, jumping for the tip, for the initial possession. I think that was a little bit of a message. He said that offensive transition this year is much better than last year. You can see it already. He said that defense needs to crash the boards more, and I think that's just another product of Marcus Garrett not being here. I mean, you don't think of Marcus Garrett as a huge rebounder, but Marcus Garrett did do a whole lot on defense. I mean, he did everything. I mean, he stole the ball, he could rebound, he would block a few shots. I mean, Marcus Garrett, I would if you could just imagine this team, if Marcus Garrett were to come back for another year, which he had the opportunity to do. Just imagine this team with Marcus Garrett back. I mean, now, of course, we might not have gotten or received all the incoming talent that we got via the transfer portal and recruiting had Marcus Garrett stayed another year. But if Marcus Garrett was here another year, I can only imagine that, what the defense would be like. So the defense obviously needs to improve in that respect. And the final question, which I thought was kind of interesting, they asked Bill Self what he thought about the Big East Challenge. Obviously they're playing St. John's, which is a Big East team. And then he also talked about the SEC Challenge. I thought it was interesting. He said that you don't worry about those types of questions at this, in the heat of the moment or right here and now. You think about that further down the road. And then he went to hint that, it's really kind of difficult when you have a 12 to 14 game conference season and then you play in these tournaments at the beginning of the year, then you play exhibition games, you play these interleague challenges like the Big East Challenge and the SEC Challenge, and then you're up to 26, 28 games, and then you haven't scheduled anybody else when you count your conference into this. So that got me to thinking that he's kind of already sort of thinking down the road when Kansas is a Big Ten team, because I'm just doing the quick math. You got Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas, Iowa State, Texas Tech, Kansas State, Texas, and TCU. So I know that's 16 games, but I'm just thinking the way I interpreted it, it made it sort of sound like he was maybe thinking. I was thinking he was talking about opponents, not just necessarily games, but. Now that I think about it, there are quite a few when you think the Big 12 plays. Each team plays home and away against all their other opponents. But I don't know. I just if Kansas does go to the Big Ten, then that would make these interleague challenges even more interesting. If that comes to be. But this video is going on 8 minutes, and I didn't really want it to go this long. But Kansas will play St. John's Red Storm tomorrow night, 7 p.m. on FS1. So hopefully the number 8 team in the nation can pull out a victory and build off that win against Iona and just keep moving forward. So rock chalk Jayhawk, and let's go for a national championship. Y'all take care, and I'll talk to you later. See ya.